In 2018, a prestigious American megachurch pastor was exposed for embezzling millions of dollars from his congregation. But here's what shocked people even more. He had been preaching about wealth. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something far deeper. Today, we're exploring a paradox that has haunted religious institutions for centuries. How do organizations founded on principles of humility, charity, and moral guidance so often become centers of power, greed, and corruption? And more importantly, is this a feature of institutions themselves, or a failure of those who lead them? Welcome back to Soulway. I'm your host, and if you're seeking truth through stories, context, and balanced perspective, I hope you'll subscribe to join our growing community of curious minds. What we're diving into today isn't about attacking any faith or religion. Rather, it's a candid examination of institutional dynamics, how power structures, human nature, and theological interpretation can sometimes drift far from their original moral foundations. This is a conversation that matters across all faiths and denominations. Whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, or simply interested in understanding how institutions work, this analysis speaks to something universal about human nature and organizational behavior. So before we go further, hit that subscribe button. And as we explore this sensitive topic together, I'd love to now. Let's begin our journey. The historical foundation, understanding where this began. To understand modern corruption, we must first acknowledge something uncomfortable. The problem isn't new. When the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity in the 4th century, something fundamental shifted. Overnight, Christianity transformed from a persecuted minority into a state-sanctioned power structure. Suddenly, church positions weren't just spiritual roles. They were political appointments. Church leaders commanded armies. They owned vast lands, they influenced kingdoms. Here's the twist many don't realize. This wasn't what early believers envisioned. Early Christian texts emphasized voluntary simplicity, communal sharing, and explicit warnings against accumulating wealth. One famous passage states that the love of money is the root of all evil. Yet, as institutions solidified, the very accumulation of money became integral to institutional survival and expansion. The same pattern repeated throughout history. Whether we examine the medieval Catholic Church's sale of indulgences, which sparked the Protestant Reformation, or the institutional hierarchies that developed in other faith traditions, we see a consistent theme. Spiritual authority, when merged with material power, creates a dangerous alchemy. But here's what's crucial to understand. Institutional corruption isn't unique to Christianity. It's a human problem that emerges wherever authority consolidates without adequate checks and accountability. Think about this. When spiritual authority claims to represent the divine, how do you hold it accountable? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. What does this look like today? Fast forward to the 21st century. The mechanisms have changed, but the dynamics persist. Consider the prosperity gospel movement, a modern theological interpretation that claims God rewards the righteous with financial wealth. Ironically, this doctrine primarily enriches the pastors who preach it, not the congregants who tithe. Several megachurch pastors have accumulated personal fortunes exceeding $100 million while their congregations struggle financially. But prosperity gospel is just one manifestation. In 2020, the Catholic Church released a report revealing that over $2 billion in pandemic relief funds meant for struggling families had been misallocated or embezzled by dioceses. Meanwhile, the Church maintained its own substantial investments and real estate holdings. In evangelical churches across North America, financial transparency scandals have become disturbingly routine. Pastors with lavish lifestyles, private jets, luxury mansions, designer clothing justify these expenditures through theological reasoning. Their success reflects God's approval. Here's where it gets complicated. Many individual church members operate with genuine faith and integrity. They volunteer, serve their communities, and live modestly. Yet they often remain unaware of institutional financial mismanagement happening above them. This raises a profound question. How complicit is the average believer when institutional leadership operates in secrecy? Where's the line between personal faith and institutional accountability? The problem intensifies when we consider clergy abuse scandals. The Catholic Church's documented history of concealing sexual abuse by priests reveals something even more disturbing than financial corruption. an institution prioritizing its own reputation and power over the protection of vulnerable children. This wasn't an anomaly. Similar patterns have emerged across Protestant denominations, Orthodox communities, and other faith institutions globally. Most major religious traditions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, contain explicit teachings against materialism, pride, and the abuse of authority. Christ's teachings about serving the poor, Islamic principles of zakat and communal responsibility, Jewish emphasis on justice and ethical conduct. These aren't peripheral teachings, they're central. Yet institutions claiming to represent these traditions often embody their exact opposite. This isn't accidental. Sociologists call this the iron law of institutions. As organizations grow, they inevitably prioritize institutional survival over their original mission. Bureaucracies emerge. Hierarchies solidify. Self-perpetuation becomes the implicit goal. A striking example, in many denominations, lower-level clergy take vows of poverty while upper leadership lives luxuriously. The theological justification? Leadership requires resources and respect. But notice the logic. Spiritual authority somehow justifies material inequality, which contradicts the very texts justifying that authority. Some of the most morally courageous religious leaders throughout history actively rejected the institutional power. They lived simply. They challenged corrupt leadership. And often, they were persecuted by those same institutions. This suggests something important. Personal faith can exist independently from institutional corruption. The problem isn't faith itself, it's institutional pathology. Systemic factors enabling corruption. Why does this persist? Why doesn't this problem simply resolve itself? Several systemic factors perpetuate this cycle. First, opacity and lack of accountability. Unlike public companies required to file financial reports, many religious institutions operate with minimal external oversight. Donations are collected, budgets are internal, and financial decisions are made by unelected leadership. When you combine money with secrecy, corruption becomes inevitable. Second, authority immunity. Religious leaders often claim divine appointment or special spiritual status. This creates psychological barriers to questioning. Congregants are conditioned to trust rather than investigate. Challenging leadership isn't just disagreement, it's framed as spiritual rebellion. Third, exploitation of faith. Leaders skillfully invoke scripture to justify their accumulation. They reframe luxury as God's blessing. They interpret wealth as evidence of divine favor. When your authority comes from theological interpretation, you control the narrative entirely. Fourth, institutional inertia. Changing institutional culture is enormously difficult. Whistleblowers face retaliation. Reformers encounter resistance from entrenched leadership. The institution protects itself, often prioritizing its image over addressing internal corruption. Fifth, the recruitment problem. Ironically, positions of unchecked authority attract certain personality types. People drawn to power rather than genuine spiritual service gravitate toward these roles. Once in position, they use institutional resources to consolidate power further. Diverse responses across traditions. How different communities address. Not all religious communities respond identically to these challenges. There's important nuance here. Some Christian denominations have implemented financial transparency measures, external audits, and term limits for leadership. These reforms haven't eliminated corruption, but they've reduced its scale and frequency. Within Islam, the concept of shura consultation and collective decision-making theoretically prevents individual leaders from accumulating unchecked power. However, implementation varies drastically. Authoritarian Islamic institutions contradict this principle, while communities emphasizing shura demonstrate greater accountability. Jewish communities have established ethics boards and financial oversight mechanisms in many synagogues, though not universally. The key insight: institutional structures matter. Communities that embrace transparency, rotate leadership, involve congregants in financial decisions, and create mechanisms for accountability experience fewer corruption scandals. This doesn't eliminate corruption. Corruption is a human tendency, not a structural inevitability. But transparency and accountability dramatically reduce its incidence. Here's my question for you. Have you noticed differences in how various religious communities handle accountability? Do you trust institutions with transparency, or has faith fundamentally shifted to personal conviction for you? Share your perspective in the comments. The critical distinction, perhaps the most important insight from all of this. Institutional corruption doesn't invalidate personal faith. Someone can authentically believe in the teachings of their tradition while simultaneously recognizing that institutions claiming to represent that tradition have become corrupted. Many genuinely spiritual people operate within these institutions, trying to reform them from within. Others have left institutions entirely while maintaining personal faith. Both responses are legitimate. The danger emerges when people conflate institutional integrity with spiritual truth. When an institution fails morally, it doesn't mean the underlying teachings are false. It means humans, being human, have distorted them. So where does this leave us? Religious institutions aren't inherently evil, nor are they uniquely corrupt compared to secular organizations. Rather, they're human institutions vulnerable to the same pathologies as any organization: unchecked power, secrecy, and prioritizing self-preservation over mission. The question isn't whether corruption will occur, it will. The question is whether communities will implement the mechanisms to detect it, address it, and prevent it from becoming systemic. More profoundly, can individuals maintain authentic faith while maintaining healthy skepticism toward institutions? The answer, I believe, is yes. Faith and critical thinking aren't opposites. In fact, many would argue that genuine faith demands we hold institutions accountable to the very principles they claim to represent. As we conclude, I want to ask, what did this video make you reconsider? Do you think institutional reform is possible, or has corruption become too embedded? I genuinely want to hear your perspective in the comments below. If this conversation resonated with you, if you believe our media landscape needs more balanced, thoughtful analysis of complex topics, please subscribe to Soulway. We explore religion, history, ethics, and institutional dynamics with nuance, respect, and intellectual rigor. Share this video with someone who might benefit from this perspective. And return to join us next time as we continue examining the intersections of faith, power, and human nature. Thank you for watching.